Welcome to the Startup Defense. My name is Callie Keene. Today I have my friend Terry. So Terry, we have this story about SEACOMP and manufacturing, which of course is near and dear to my heart. Manufacturing, all things, learning how and where things are made. But currently you're a global manufacturer. You make really high volume, great things. And I do want to dive into what those are, but you're building a new facility in Mexico, so nearshoring that capability. And you and I have talked about getting more involved in the startup scene, which I know you're West Coast, you're embedded in anyways, but then in defense tech, which is now we're really at the core of things that I love. But before I spoil it, can you tell the audience like who you are, what do you do, and most importantly, what are you passionate about right now?
Yeah, Kelly, great to be with you, and thanks for the intro. I'm Terry Arbaugh, VP of Sales and Marketing at SEACOMP. I've been here 16 and a half years, which just seems insane. I always say it seems like it's, kind of 6 different 2 to 3 year stints at different startups. We kind of started as one thing. We've done some acquisitions, we've added some services, and, we bought a factory in China, now we're opening a factory in Mexico, like you mentioned. So it's been a completely different journey every couple of years. So it doesn't feel like one 16-year chunk, but SEACOMP is, we design and manufacture industrial, medical, and consumer electronics. So everything we do has some electronics content, and then we do a lot of injection molding. We do a lot of, turnkey assembly and full box builds kind of around those electronics for our customers around the world. Generally, we're, when we're working with startups, it's more, kind of the scale up, right? If you have not a job shop, not really low volume, but if there's potential to, grow into something that's going to be, 10, 20,000 ish, type volumes and have the potential to go up from there, we're a great partner, right? Most of our customers are spending, let's say, between, $2 and $15 million a year per project, with us, but we've got some outliers on either side of those numbers, depending on what industries and how long it might take to ramp. So I'm sitting here in San Diego, Cali. We've got a product development engineering team here. We only do engineering for things that we're going to manufacture. So we're not a engineering services company, but we do have the means to take, all the way from a napkin sketch all the way into a full manufactured product with, testing and certifications and packaging and everything else. We have a factory, as you mentioned, in Dongguan, China, which we've been operating for, 10-ish years. As a factory owner in China, the electronics manufacturing capital of the world. And like you mentioned, we're just opening up Tijuana, Mexico. SMT lines are going in this week. We've got some trials for next week and really expect production to begin in March, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it is super exciting because for so long, China really has been the de facto, if I want to make thousands and thousands of something, particularly in the commercial space, that you could try to avoid it, or if the volume's very high, maybe build your own factory. But most likely, that's the manufacturing floor of the world, at least for consumer goods, right?
Right.
I'll lump some medical goods and some tech goods in there as well. Obviously, iPhone, iPad.
Sure.
Like it is what it is. But we start to see this changing. One, in my space, because there's new opportunities and there's new regulations around where we can source. But then also because we see Mexico kind of coming up more and more online and making more and more sophisticated parts. I guess traditionally I would have thought of some power components and then a lot of automotive things being built in Mexico, not so much complex electronics parts. I know that that's probably holistically incorrect, but me as somebody that sources product from all over, that hasn't been as successful up until recently to say, hey, I want to get a board made and I want an injection molded plastic and I want box build and I want it kitted and I want it, like a very sophisticated product all
Sure.
done right across the border in Juarez or Tijuana or what have you. But What were kind of the components for you at SEACOMP that drove that decision? Because this is a big investment. You're not
Sure.
just saying, "Hey, we're going to use a Mexico." We're not just going to go visit and like use a factory. We will be the factory. So there's probably a lot of factors involved in that.
Yeah, a whole lot, and a lot with what you just said. Right, historically, Mexico's been manufacturing for a long time, even in the border, regions in Tijuana, Baja California. There's been a lot of television manufacturing there for a long time. There are a lot of um, uh, large products that are being made there, appliances and irrigation control systems, and so there's a really robust manufacturing base down there. But just like you mentioned, historically, it wasn't for the consumer electronics or industrial medical type, smaller electronics that are typically coming from China. So there's this there's this whole base, and as most of us know, the tariffs that were implemented 5-6 years ago really were the starting point of this conversation for us. As a manufacturer in China, suddenly almost every product we make, a good high percentage of the products that we manufacture for customers were suddenly subject to a 25% import tariff, right? So that started the discussions where it's really customer driven demand. A lot of the products we make, Callie, in the volumes that we make them in the tens or hundreds of thousands typically, not iPhone volumes and things like that. A lot of those customers and those size projects, it didn't make sense for them to put the resources or the money towards retooling and moving production. So a lot of customers, in these small and mid volumes, just kind of bit the bullet and absorbed the tariff or had to pass on their costs to their end customers. But for their next product, quite often those conversations were, okay, how do we start this one outside of China so we can avoid the tariff, right? So that was the starting point. Um, you started throwing in when COVID hit, you had the global supply chain crisis, you had all the shipping, issues. So, you've got geopolitical tensions, people concerned about, potential conflict in the area. You kind of keep layering on all these things, and a lot of our customers here in the U.S. just kind of started thinking, yeah, we'd like to not manufacture in China. What are our other options? Southeast Asia, uh, Thailand, Vietnam, Taiwan, uh, Singapore picked up a lot of manufacturing that was leaving China. We were originally looking at the Philippines. We've got a whole Hong Kong team. We've got sourcing in China. We spend a lot of money over there, right? So we have a good amount of buying power. And Philippines is a couple-hour flight away. They speak English. We thought, okay, that will be our non-China option. Well, COVID and supply chain and everything else kind of created some additional complexities that drove our owner, our CEO, who's an American guy who was living in Hong Kong for 10 years, drove him back to San Diego. So with that move, we moved from Hong Kong, kind of the finance group and our operations group, and we ended up changing our strategy for our non-China, we call it our plus one, to just down the street, right? So now Tijuana is an hour from where I'm standing. We could be at the factory, which is amazing, right? So not just from a tariff cost standpoint, but from you do product development, you do manufacturing. Is there any substitute for if you've designed something and we're going to be your manufacturer, working together in the same building and doing that knowledge transfer and saying, hey, when I built these first 20 pieces in my garage, here's the 3 areas that gave me the most trouble, right? And collaborating and talking about that. So having a factory an hour away, it's really not hard to get people to come to San Diego. Like we said, you look behind me outside in January and it's 71 degrees here in San Diego. So not a
For
hard
people
place
that are only listening, Terry's flexing beautiful mountains in the background, perfect weather.
Yeah,
He's trying to say, "Hey, come visit me. Visit the new factory."
that's right.
Okay, twist my arm, Terry.
Yeah, if not for the SMT equipment, Cal, I do it for the weather.
I've seen
yeah,
SMT equipment. It's winter
that's
right
right.
now. So.
Yeah, so it's really exciting. It's a really exciting time. I think being able for a whole lot of reasons, being able to offer this plus one option to our customer base is really exciting. And kind of to the point you were making earlier too, you're never going to fully avoid China in the world and the products that we operate in, right? We usually say industrial, medical, and consumer products, small enough to fit into an oven. Regardless of where you're manufacturing or doing your final assembly, some of the materials or components are coming from China, right? So there is that piece. So how do we manage them? How do we buy them? How do we ship them? How do we, have the right certifications and processes to avoid tariffs, right? To do substantial transformation in country and change the country of origin, So there is all of those things that we're figuring out. So it is a fun time and it's challenging. I'm learning about a lot of things that I didn't necessarily think a sales guy would have to learn about.
Well, I grew up and I'm in a factory right now. So it's hard for me to imagine how people get product development done. And we develop lots and lots of products. So to be fair, it would be impossible unless I was in an actual factory. But it always boggles my mind when people put out these products and they can't just walk down and look at it on a machine or put it together themselves and with their team, because there is such a big gap between designing something and making it. And to be fair, making it, if we had a complete turnkey product and I said, here you go, Terry, now I want to make 10,000 of these a month, there's a big gap between making 100 of something or making 100 a month and making 10,000 a month. We've worked on some fairly sizable projects with people like J-Bill or Benchmark, and they're on the next size up where they're building a factory to make that product. So helping them bring up and design the layout of a factory or designing the process to make a part or a product. And that cost is just outside of the reach of most people that would be in my space, right? Particularly being in defense, somebody is probably not going to make $1 million a year of any product. So when they go and engage Bench, great company, and they're talking about standing up a factory to make something or a portion, a part of a factory. And then, tens of millions of dollars are going to go into investment of making that product. And so it makes a lot of sense if somebody's nearshoring. How do you make 10,000 or 10,000 a month of something? Well, you need to have a next best fit option. You need a next best fit option. So Mexico makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I wanted to bring you on to, talk about what you're doing. And I think this fits in this broader narrative that we're seeing of manufacturing, particularly in San Diego and Los Angeles, that just really a lot of hard tech happening, a lot of startups happening, and the need for U.S. manufacturing, or we'll say North American manufacturing, really just exploding, right? Is part of this, I mean, part of it's definitely so you could just drive an hour and see, hey, here's this thing being made. But is part of that also so you can jump into defense market or work with, there's some non-defense manufacturing startups that are happening in LA and San Diego, very interesting, but a lot of momentum there.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can, I want to go back. There's a couple of things you said that I think are really important. The Benchmark can build a factory to build your product. Finding the right size manufacturer for you or your product. Not just from a technology standpoint, but from a commercial standpoint, is really, really critical, right? So that's something we talk about quite often. If you are trying to take a product that you're going to make 10,000 of and you're trying to go to a Benchmark or a Flex, they're going to kind of laugh you out of the building, right? And there's some people that we've seen that have come from large companies that have these relationships with these really large, manufacturers, and they go to a startup and they can use the relationship to get in, right? And the potential to get into some of those startup or the larger manufacturers. But if your volume doesn't pick up and meet or exceed what you told them or what they planned on, the larger manufacturers have no problem firing smaller customers and using that space and that equipment, for higher returns, higher return projects.
They have to, yeah,
right.
They have to.
They'll have to, right? The electronics manufacturing world is not a real high volume, real high margin world in these kind of spaces. So yeah, it's really, really critical. The flip side of that is, and we've had some of these of these cases where a startup is looking to build 5 or 10 or 20,000. They think if things go really well, and then they actually have a huge hit on their hands, and then it's 100, 150, 200,000 a year, and they've picked a manufacturer that can't scale with them, right? So also a huge problem, right? When you're losing revenue, or you've just sunk a bunch of money into designing and tooling and getting started manufacturing something, and you've got to do that again somewhere else because this company can't keep up with your volumes. But you can't afford to shut them down and transfer tools and get something else up, right, in the interim, because you'd be lying down for a while. So choosing the right fit manufacturing partner is absolutely critical in that sense. So that was one thing I wanted to address with what you said earlier. So,
yeah, I appreciate that. It's one of the main things that we try to push is think about seamless scale. Like as your business goes up, what is this going to look like? You might not have this problem with a simple or medium complexity product making thousands of them, but in general, the types of products that you and I are talking about, so electronics, who's going to put that together? Think if it takes you 15 minutes to put something together and you have to make 10,000 of them a month, like that's a lot of people. Like, is that even possible, right? Does that require automation? Really simple questions will make you evaluate who you should be working for, or do they have, like, we have all these upstream relationships, like we know we know other factories. So it's like, do they have experience handing something off to a higher volume manufacturer? And what does that look like? Lots of good, really good questions.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like, your level of experience and expertise, even if you were to design something and hand it off to us to manufacture, right? You know what you're doing. You've got the experience. You know exactly how to design things. Well, we might have some DFM design for manufacturing recommendations for us. We might ask you to make some adjustments to your design. Not that your design is wrong or can't be made, but in order for us to make it with our equipment and our processes, if you make these adjustments, it would be better, more efficient, more cost effective, higher quality, whatever it is for us to manufacture, right? So having a manufacturing expert design something is still going to have some back and forth, right? So if you can imagine, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, a lot of the customers we deal with that go from small to very large companies, they have varying degrees of manufacturing experience, some none at all. Some startups have just designed things to be 3D printed and tested some prototypes and think they're 90% done, right? That we just need to, clean it up and move on, right? So the gap between the design and being a manufacturable product at whatever volume that you need it to be, to your point, how many cavities do you make? How many tools do you make? How many test fixtures for programming PCBAs and end-of-line testing? All of those things you have to consider to get to, okay, what is the throughput number we have to reach every month? All of those considerations, have to be made. How long is it going to take to get components? How long does it take to get certified? For your products to ship into whatever countries with whatever radios, so all of those considerations, have to go hand in hand and kind of be matched up to be a successful launch. How we do that without always setting foot in the factory, back to your one point you made, is tough, especially during COVID, right? One thing we did a 3D virtual tour of the factory, so we could do a walkthrough of the factory. So if you were, coming to see SEACOMP, normally we would invite you over, but since you couldn't travel, we'd at least be able to do a walkthrough and show you where the equipment is, what we have, and kind of do a real estate type walkthrough of the factory. But having processes, having program managers, having communication, regular communication is absolutely critical, right? So our factory in China, Cali, we have the GM is American. We have an Australian engineering manager, so we kind of operate with English as the primary language at the executive level, and people that operate with the same standards that we would have for what good looks like, right? What done looks like, so that communication is really, really critical. But certainly nothing beats being in the room, right? To your point. So yeah, that's one of the things we're really excited about, of course.
Well, let's go back to talking about the Southern California manufacturing renaissance that's happening. and you're right in the thick of things. So you're in between LA and Tijuana and San Diego. So we've got a lot of customers in that area, but there's so much activity happening in LA. Lots of startups coming out of that. How has SEACOMP been able to participate in that ecosystem that's bubbling up?
Yeah, it's interesting for us, being here. We've been a small company. We've been growing, right? So it's not like a lot of people have heard of us or knew us in the past. One of the things, being a small company and being responsible for marketing, as you might know, marketing budgets are hard to get. Quite often it's, hey, we're investing in a factory, or you can spend some money in marketing. It's like, well, okay, yes, let's buy the SMT line, or let's get the building, right? So you try to figure out ways to do things. So I think we may have met through Clubhouse that did a year and a half worth of weekly hardware rooms on Clubhouse, which is just didn't have to spend any money, just time doing it, trying to build a robust network of partners, right? That's been a huge thing, and we've really focused in on that in Southern California. So anybody who comes to us, and most people that we might talk to are not fits for us. Maybe at the time, maybe they're just too early, maybe ever. They're not going to get to where they're going to scale production. We just never want to turn anybody away. We want to help people be successful in the hardware world. So we've got a giant, robust network of vendors, partners, industrial design, prototyping, product development, small scale manufacturing, sourcing for things we don't do, like soft goods. We don't do industrial design here. We don't do fulfillment, right? Sometimes, inventory financing, things like that we don't do, but we have built out this network so we can connect people outwards to partners to be successful. And in turn, of course, that raises our profile a bit, and we get those companies sending those same customers back to us when they are ready to scale. So that's been a part of it. Participating in things like LA Tech Week, participating in doing some, sponsoring some events at CES, where a lot of the Southern Californians, go up to Vegas for the CES event. So, doing a lot of those things, trying to raise our profile, has been really, really important. And then I think one of the questions you asked earlier, I think that is a exciting new potential area for us being here in San Diego. And as soon as we get all of our certs, done and get manufacturing started here by the end of the quarter, I think being able to start participating and looking at some products that in the past we've had people reach out to us, but we were not able to build for defense or for ITAR reasons. Right. So there are a lot of products that are coming up and opportunities that are coming up with the local startup scene here. I think I introduced you to one of them that I met as a mentor at Techstars. Right. So I was doing a mentorship or as a mentor at Techstars San Diego here just recently. And so, yeah, seeing a lot of these types of companies that come up that now we have an opportunity because of our nearshore location is really exciting and a whole new thing for us. So I can't really wait to dig into it.
Yeah, it's an absurd growth area. I saw a great statistic the other day. Basically, there's been more investment in that specific space and your locale in the last year and a half, 2 years as there were in the previous 10.
Yeah.
And
it's wild.
And you can look at the spaces in the general numbers. There isn't a ton of growth, but that's because there's very large entrenched companies building really big stuff. And so as a startup person running accelerators, looking at markets, you look at this, what's the growth of this actual market? And you see that it's low, and that turns away, or traditionally has turned away some investment because this is a slow growth market. But the reality is, if you take off the top layer of those large companies and you look at the growth of investment in new technology, so in startups, it's been an outrageous, instead of it being a 5% growth market, it's a 200% growth market. It's unreal, the market change that's happened in the past couple of years. I'm here for it because it's what I do. I've done forever. But it makes me a little bit jealous because you're not that far away from LA, and there's some really cool companies. There's great companies in your own backyard. And yeah, to your point, like you as a mentor with Techstars, we're gonna try to have that team come on the podcast. But we love plucking those really great tech companies coming out of that ecosystem and say like, hey, this is a sticky market, and there's a lot of things that you have to do compliance wise, sales wise. It's not as straightforward, but what a great opportunity now. And it's exciting to see you build the new facility, because I definitely want to see it once it's a little bit more cooked and go down. But to be able to participate in that market, I really think you're gonna be able to ride this innovation wave that's happening with just across the board. It's very, very exciting to me as a manufacturer, as an innovation person. I'm a little jealous, Terry. That's all I'm saying.
Well, like I said, we'll get you an invite to the grand opening for sure. But yeah, you're completely right. The investment in these areas in Southern California, also the investment and demand in Tijuana and Baja California, the area of in the manufacturing side too, right? So you have both from the startup and the business investment, but then also from kind of the manufacturing, like us, the investment that's going into that area to support that growth. I mean, the investment in this total region is off the charts. And it is a really exciting time for a lot of things. San Diego has been big in biotech, right? And that investment, continues to scale. A lot of the projects we do, are, connected devices, IoT devices, right? Where, people are using electronics and sensors to gather data, and the hardware is a means to an end, right? The value that they're selling quite often is the data and the analytics and the knowledge that comes from what the sensor is gathering and communicating and collecting, right? So the hardware is a means to that end. But yeah, the total investment, when you go LA to TJ is just crazy, and it is really exciting to be a part of it. So yeah, we'll get you out here soon.
I really predict that there's going to be regulation change around this, because it's such a obvious move is with what's happening in your region to then manufacture in the Baja, that it'll be built into what the regulations are for US or domestic sourcing, that there's opportunity zones or whatever that they want to call it, to be able to nearshore and produce defense electronics like in near border or in certain just in certain spaces, because it makes so much sense to do so.
And the investment, like one of the things that China has always has had for a long time as a competitive advantage is the supply chain and the supply base, right? So in China, you can get any component and material like within, a couple of hour drive of the factory. If you need something, you can send a truck, right? You can go pick it up for the most part if you need it. And that's been something that's been built over decades. And so to your point, if we see the momentum continue here in this total region, right? The investment, both from a startup standpoint, from some of the larger companies, you've got Qualcomm and you've got some huge players, right down here. So if that continues, you've got companies like Future Electronics and Arrow, the big distributors, right? So if that whole momentum continues, then this region is going to have an attractive supply base as well. And so then if that is combined with the regulation changes that you speak of specifically for the defense world, I think that's absolutely critical, where you can, source, procure, build, and ship everything from this local geography, right? Without any content necessarily coming from China, but at least you're buying directly. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and it's going to be a really exciting, next few years.
We're tracking the CHIPS Act, and if they want to really support semiconductors being made in the US, so you can decouple from a Chinese supply chain, or in part or in whole, that is a very ambitious project, right? It's a multi-decade long project to be able to build a very simple board and it to be all US made components. It's quite literally impossible right now to do that. And for that to not be impossible, there's a lot of infrastructure that has to happen. But in support of that, then there has to be people that will have the SMT lines. They'll have that at scale. And for the most part, unless you're making very expensive items, it still doesn't make sense or would never make sense to do that in San Diego, right? So Tijuana makes sense. And so I think you'll see regulations that where it's a US held company that is then operating in specialized opportunity zones in, XYZ countries.
Right.
Which will then meet the TAA and BAA compliance requirements. But
yeah, totally right. I think that we get asked this a lot, like, hey, is manufacturing coming back to the U.S., right? And it's yes, right. And I think I've heard some of your podcast guests in the past, right, where manufacturing output is as high as it's ever been, but the number of people doing it is lower,
much less,
right? Yeah. So the productivity has gone way up, but I don't think people necessarily either realize or remember the move for electronics manufacturing to China wasn't like one policy and everybody left, right? That was millions of individual, capitalist business decisions of, hey, this makes more sense. We're going to go over here because of the cost and what we can get and how we can increase our margins and all that. And so it was a whole bunch of business decisions and some macroeconomic factors driving all those decisions. So the reverse of that is not going to happen with a policy, right? Or a law.
By fiat, right? Yeah, you can't. Yeah,
how do you create the environment? Right? How do you create the environment to do that? The CHIPS Act is a great start. Right? The tariffs, and all these other things that are going on are kind of pushing stuff back. It's not necessarily a pull, but there is, if that continues to happen, if we are going to get more manufacturing here, how are we going to educate a workforce that has the skills to, run a factory, run SMT lines, do injection molding, do, metal stamping? Like there is a gap in terms of the number of workers and the education and the abilities that we have. If suddenly we had all this manufacturing coming back, that would be a problem too, because we don't have we don't have the human resources to be able to support that sort of move. So that discussion is long term and really complex and nuanced. It's a good one, but it'll, we're off to a good start in this region, at least, to see kind of where it takes us.
Yeah, that's smart. I'd like to think of this as a long-term forcing function. So where the funding is, that's where the energy goes, where the focus goes, that's where the energy goes. So we've seen this in climate tech with a 10, 20x change in federal funds and investment. We've seen this now in defense, where there's a lot of money going into that area, whether it's private capital or it's better funding vehicles. And so then with those opportunities, more people get involved, more smart people get involved, more people that are skilled become more skilled, or they become more knowledgeable about that industry or that problem set. But it's still a long-term problem, right? To your point, like if I'm in China and I go to see an injection molding factory, high probability that inside that same little car park, industrial park, I can just walk to a place that does machining, and walk to a place that makes their tooling, and walk to a place that does box build, and then a place that does pretty much anything that I would need to make an IoT product. They might even be in the same building on different floors.
Yes.
And I could just walk from one company to the next and get the whole thing done. Whereas here, it might take me a month or so to connect all of those dots, to find the right fit relationships for all of those pieces. It might take a lot of documentation back and forth. It's actual real work. It is it's somebody's job. I mean, building supply chains and building resilient supply chains is not just super easy, but in China, there's so many people being involved in it. If I need a engineer to look at an injection molding tool, I can hire one that day, no problem. I can find 5. If not, the factory has a staff of 5 or 50 of these people. Experts. Yeah. Whereas here, I'm the expert, right? And I'm like, okay, I want to find another person like me that can take a part from 3D print to machine to injection mold or die cast or some, other exotic manufacturing, right fit for volume process. And those people already have jobs, or they run companies that run factories, right? They're not just loose running around being like, oh, I'll help you, Terry. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, yeah.
right.
I'll give you 2 hours of my time. Like, there just isn't enough of those people. They already work for, Apple, or they already work for, GE, or they already work for some, they already work for themselves usually.
That's right.
But
And the extension of that, from the extension of that in our world from a manufacturing standpoint that we're starting to plan for and weigh out is in China. If you are doing 10,000 a month, and like I said, you hit a sales spike, and now you need 100,000 a month. In China, we can do that pretty quickly, right? We could ramp up. There's whether it's extra shifts, whether it's capacity in the neighborhood. If you needed to borrow some injection molding, if there is ways and there is workforce available to be able to be, hey, I need 100,000 a month for 3 months, and then ramp it back down. Cool, no problem. It's not going to be that way in Tijuana. It's not going to be, just to your point about the availability. I think the expertise is there. I think there's a lot of great people. The team that we're putting together, I'm extremely impressed with in Tijuana. So their knowledge and their experience is world class. There's just not as many of them, and you extend that to the workforce. And so, yeah, we certainly plan on being a little bit more stable, right? Not quite as flexible or as nimble as we are in China, as we're going to have to be in Tijuana. So to that point, I think it's a shrunk down version of what a lot of people see in China. And then the same thing, China compared to the rest of Southeast Asia, like we talked about when the tariffs hit and the pandemic hit, and all these companies were moving production outside of China. China has more workers by factors than the rest of the Southeast Asian countries combined, right? And so it's not just the quantity of workers; it's the skill and the experience. It's not just that they're cheap; they're very, very good. The expertise that's available in volume of people is unreal over there. A lot of people think China is just cheap and low cost, low quality. No, there is that, but there is a great deal of expertise there, and just more people generally than are going to be available. So yeah, it'll be an interesting dynamic. It'll be something we contend with, and we'll have to communicate with our customers about that. That is, we are not going to be the as nimble as China has allowed us to be in the past.
Well, I think if we were having this conversation closer to when we met, like a year and a half, 2 years ago, I would be like, Terry, how do we get people interested in making physical products and going for innovation? And of course, for me, that means tech and it means defense. And I'd say, how do we get people excited about this? I think we're a little bit past that. People are getting progressively more and more excited right now. But I think the next question, the forcing function of this, is now how do we get people excited about making the innovation? Because if you control manufacturing, you essentially control the pathway to innovation. And as that comes back, to your point, there's nobody to make it. There's not enough people right now. That's why you're building the factory. But how do we get more people to look at that problem and get really excited about going into, whether it's engineering or it's just the sales aspect of it, or it's, whatever is the facilitation of that innovation to market? How do we get people excited about it?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I didn't know this career or kind of in this industry really existed when I was younger. So that's part of it is awareness. And I think the way I'd answer it, Callie, is showing people. I think what I'm really excited about of having the factory, it gives us an opportunity to do some events. I think we can bring some people down. We can do some video. We can show people what manufacturing looks like, and then I think explaining the impact. So one of the things to me that is always just really profound, I guess it's never lost on me every time I go to the factory. So I sit here in San Diego. I've got a family that I take care of with this job. We've got engineers, we've got sourcing, we've got finance, we've got all these people here, program managers that also do the same thing, and we're working with our customers. We have a factory, a whole staff, executive, down to the line leaders or line workers, that all of them are taking care of their families. So if we are talking to you about an early stage project and we get it into engineering and product development and tooling, and we go through NPI and we are in production, if you start thinking about the number of people that process, that product has impacted, not only from you, the customer side, and your employees and your families, but your end customers and their enjoyment of the product. Our team here, the workers that are building it, right? So when you think of the ripple effects of the impact of just a single customer interaction, a single product development interaction can have, it is absolutely incredible. And I think quite often people want to make an impact, right? With your career choice or with your life, you want to feel like you're doing something valuable. And if we can maybe tell that story, if we can show that story a little bit and say, hey, if you do this, it's not just interesting for yourself, but man, you can really have an impact across the world. I think telling that story hopefully gets people interested. That's the best answer I've got. I don't know if that's
fantastic. No, manufacturing in general, and up until recently, defense in general, very large, quiet industries, right? No, the reason that it's hard to get that marketing budget is most manufacturing companies don't market at all. I know people that have $100 million plus manufacturing businesses. They barely have a website. They don't need one. The marketing would do nothing for them because they're so heavily invested in capital equipment. There's so much that has to be spent to go to the next level. They're like, okay, well, we have 300 employees now. To go to the next level of profitability, we would need to have 700 employees. So we already can get that work, but we need to plan this out. And this is going to take 3 or 5 years. They're not like, oh, if I could run Facebook ads, like we could really blow this company up. Like, and so like, they're just quietly working. And I grew up in the industry. So I know this is like, there's people in manufacturing talk to other people that are in manufacturing, but not necessarily out of that. And that really hasn't worked out for the industry as a whole for the past 30, 40 years. Is we need to open up our doors and show people like there's good jobs, there's really high impact things that you can do. You can get paid very significantly, or you can work with your hands. There's an opportunity at every level, right? If you want to make $1 million a year, whatever crazy thing people are thinking, like the opportunity's there. Or if you want to just have a very reasonable job that's very stable, the opportunity is there. But yeah, traditionally it's like, I'm a manufacturer, I'm busy working. I'm not really trying to impress anybody. My job's very hard and it's very detail oriented. I'm going to keep my focus, on what is important, not in impressing a lot of people. And I think that, you just showing, hey, here's what an SMT line. Have you ever thought of like what makes the guts that's in everything that you touch and play with?
Everything you touch. No, absolutely. It is really interesting. And again, the impact you can have. We do some ESG activities, right? We support an organization that helps send young women to college in third world countries, right? And the statistics around what value educated women bring to their communities on a per dollar investment basis, the return is so much greater than the men, right? And the men's in a lot of those countries are generally the ones that have the opportunities, and so funding women to have those opportunities, like we're having that sort of an impact, right? So, like you said, you can work with your hands. Maybe that's your motivation. Maybe it's learning and solving complex problems. Maybe that's your motivation. Maybe your motivation is to reduce waste in the world. So how can you work as a designer to create more sustainable packaging? There are 100 different interesting ways or hooks that could get people involved in this world and considering this world as a career path, as a future, if we tell the story better. And I think that's something we can try to do with this closer presence.
Wow, it's amazing. Terry, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Startup Defense.
Awesome. Thanks for the conversation. Really appreciate it, Callie.
My name is Callie Keene, and this has been the Startup Defense.